everyone. So I definitely hope that everyone will be really active throughout today by sharing in the chat and unmuting. We have an activity we're going to do at some point. Following the presentation, you will get a copy of this presentation as well as your attendance or CEU certificate. It takes me about 2 weeks usually to get those out. And I did want to let folks know that I have gotten approval now for August and September for anyone that participated in those. So it'll take me just a couple of weeks now to create all of those certificates and get them out. But if you attended in September or October, I'll also be sending those certificates out. And then as soon as we have the final approval for this one, I'll get that out to folks as well. And then as usual, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the slide, and I will also make sure it gets posted in the chat at the end of the presentation today. And then I'll just go back to say a little bit about myself. I think looking at the participant list, I do know lots of you. My name is Claire Grace, and I'm a training consultant and project manager with the Department of Public Health. I've worked in prevention in Iowa for more than 15 years now. I did community prevention. I'm a certified community prevention specialist. I also oversaw prevention services and worked as a director. I've worked as a capacity coach. I've had the opportunity to work with lots of you in some of the different roles that I've been in Iowa. And so I feel really fortunate to be able to bring a lot of those examples and connections that I've made through that work back into these webinars. So we already did the housekeeping. So let's jump right in. And I thought that we could start. We're going to do a lot of annotating today. I'm going to give a quick tutorial on that for those of you who may not have used it before or may have not used it recently. If you go, it always looks different on my screen. If you click on your screen where it says more, or you click the button that says annotate, you'll see a little bar pop up. And Jody, please jump in if you have a better description of how it might look different for participants. And then once you get in there for this one, I'm going to choose the T for text, and then it's going to give you a little text box to type in your answer. So if everybody wants to go ahead and click on their annotation and type in the, you can type right on the screen, or if you're on a device that is not easy to do that, please feel free to just use the chat. But I would love to know what wellness means to you. What is your definition of wellness? And I see some folks already kind of started with things. And as I said, for this one, probably the easiest thing to do is use the text function. And I'm going to try to move things around a little bit as people start populating their answers so they don't overlap. Great. So we've got lots of people sharing in the chat, lots of people sharing on the screen. Awesome. So we've got taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, socially, and financially, being safe, living safe and healthy lives, health in every aspect of life, stability, mental, physical, emotional. I see in the chat, presence of healthy living, taking time for yourself with a big explanation point, healthy habits that support physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health. Great, Capri. That's right in line with what we're going to talk about today. Meditation. Yep. I'll give just a minute. That saying no is okay. Making sure you have stability in all the different levels. Overall physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Having social structures that support. Awesome. Great. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this. To be in good health, being mentally and spiritually stable. Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to clear the drawings. I'm going to ask people to stop annotating for just a minute here. So let's take a look at SAMHSA'S definition, and I will share. I love this whole wellness initiative that they're doing, that they've been doing. But partly for those of us that work in prevention, because they've created a variety of different resources, and I've put links to a couple of them throughout this presentation, and I'll send them out also when I send the follow-up materials. So some of these slides are actually from a PowerPoint, although it's in PDF form, but it's from a PowerPoint that they created that you can actually download and adapt for your own community and use for your own purposes. So these slides that look like this actually came right from SAMHSA, which was super helpful. I know for me, and I'm sure for all of you, if you want to be able to integrate this into something that you're doing in your community. So this is their definition of wellness, which I love, the idea that it's not the absence of something. It's not just the absence of disease or the absence of illness, but it's really about a lot of the things that folks have said already: optimal physical and behavioral health. And then it's also about having a purpose. It's about being actively involved and having satisfying work. It's about joyful relationships, and it's about happiness. So I'm curious for all of you to share in the chat, how does this definition of wellness resonate with what you shared just now, or with what your own definition of wellness is? How does SAMHSA'S definition resonate with your own definition? And someone can also feel free to unmute if you want to share your answer.
This is Maggie Ballard from Heartland Family Service, and I was just going to chime in that it kind of coincides with what my thoughts about wellness are, but I just want to note that I think it's really great that our society as a whole, but of course SAMHSA, keeps emphasizing more than just the physical health. Yes,
thanks, Maggie. I love that everyone's sharing so much in the chat. So I'm trying to scroll back through. Someone also shared in the chat the connection to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is so interesting to me, because the work that I've done in prevention and also the work that I do currently in recovery, we really talk about that. That what everyone needs to be supported in wellness and in recovery and in feeling in a good place with their parenting and all of those things is, again, not just this absence of disease, but really thinking about, having my basic needs met, but then also having community and having support and having social connections and all of those things. And somebody talking about defining it as what Julie says, what it is and what it is not, that it's a focus on being healthy. It's more than just physical health. Anyone else want to unmute and share something? All right. So I think for most of us, this makes sense as this natural connection in thinking about prevention and this idea of, we're not, when you think about that analogy of the river, and that we are really focused upstream, we're focused on looking at the environment. We're thinking about what are the conditions that we can help create so that to do good prevention in our communities, and that this has such a strong connection to that. When you look at why this connection, that there's such a correlation between individuals that have substance use disorders or mental health disorders. There's a huge connection between, I think it's on this next slide here. There's also a connection between trauma and thinking about, I want to get this right. I'm looking at SAMHSA'S resource for healthcare providers and organizations. They talk about the factors that really contribute to increased risk for health problems, including risks for heart disease and other preventable conditions, including substance use, including some other behavioral health conditions, and among people specifically with behavioral health conditions. So they talk about poverty, social isolation, trauma. Nearly 32% of people with behavioral health conditions live below the poverty line. And so we think about, you're going to talk a lot today about how all of these dimensions of wellness are interconnected to each other. And so you think about someone who is living in poverty, and then perhaps connected to that is social isolation or ability to access employment or ability to access healthy foods. We think about lack of access to healthcare. And again, the connection specifically, one connection specifically with substance use is thinking about heavy and binge drinking is associated with a whole bunch of health issues. I think about when we work on creating a logic model, when I was doing this work directly and I was working with folks on, kind of creating this logic model of we're going to do, we're going to address this, we're going to do it with this service, and here's what we can expect. I think sometimes people kind of cut off the left-hand side of the logic model where we talked about consequences, consumption and consequences. And that it always goes back to that, because why do we even need to do the work that we're doing? Why do we care about underage drinking? Why do we care about tobacco use? The reason we care is because of the connection to consequences. If there weren't consequences to these behaviors, then it wouldn't make a difference if people did them or not. And so this is like looking at that socio-ecological model. It's looking at that, family level and community level of all these different factors that play into that consequences. So it's not just about substance use, but it's about that interconnectedness of how substance use is also related to trauma, is also related to physical health issues, and thinking about all of these pieces. I'm going to talk later in the webinar about doing this at the community level and thinking about shared outcomes. And so when we think about the work that we want to do in prevention, thinking about folks that are working on issues specifically to some of these dimensions of wellness and how having an impact on physical wellness or spiritual wellness or whatever it might be really does have a link to maybe something really specific that we're doing in the area of youth prevention or adult tobacco use or problem gambling or whatever that might be. So these are SAMHSA'S 8 dimensions of wellness. And through the rest of the webinar, we're going to take some time to go through each of these and look at them through both a personal lens, as well as take some time to think about how this then fits in our professional lives and in our work in communities. I'm not sure if this came just at the end before, but Sandy had shared that it's vital to have purpose and healthy, positive relationships on every level. Also loving yourself and taking care of yourself is part of this as well. Absolutely. So a little bit, so we're going to break down each of these. So I'm not going to go through each of them now, but thinking about those 8 dimensions: emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, occupational, and social. And then what I think is really interesting is layering on this idea of social inclusion in wellness. And then it really has to do with social factors. I was thinking when I was putting this together about, for those of you that were on last month's webinar about opioid use among pregnant and parenting women, Deborah Berkowitz, who did that webinar for us last month, really talked about how relationships are very central to the population that she was talking about of women with opioid use disorder, women in recovery, and how relationships are really an underlying motivation or factor in use and in recovery and in parenting and all of those pieces. And I think we see that here as well, this idea that wellness has so much connection to our social relationships and social factors that either can promote or inhibit social inclusion. And again, thinking about the impact of trauma, poverty, unemployment, all of these circumstances that not just exist on their own and in one dimension, but then really have an impact on other dimensions. So you think about someone who maybe has lost their employment, that not only does that have an impact on the financial dimension, but maybe it also has an impact socially because it has to do with their connections to others, or maybe it has an impact for them on their purpose and feeling like they really have purpose in their work. Also thinking about social inclusion and wellness are factors that can marginalize people. And so this is where we think about also considering everything that we do through that cultural lens. And so what does that tell us in terms of expectations around around social and economical and educational and cultural resource and health resources. And then knowing that we all have a role to play in building these healthy, holistic communities. I think in prevention, especially, we really think about what our role is in doing that. I think this webinar, this model from SAMHSA with the 8 dimensions really encourages us to think more broadly about what wellness means. And I think speaks to what we often talk about. We talk about having our work plan. And I think sometimes everybody's got their action plan in front of them, which is very good and important to have a plan and know how where you're going and how you're going to get there and how it's going to be measured and how you're going to get there. But I think sometimes what we also fall into when we do that is looking at that action plan as a checklist of saying like, yep, did this, did this, did this, did this. And I think taking some time today to think about how this relates to the bigger picture of what is the vision that we're really trying to create in a community. Who are the potential partners that we can bring along with us in doing our prevention work? And in this case, thinking about who else is working on issues connected to the broader definition of wellness, because physical health and spiritual health and financial health and all of these pieces really do drive the underlying causes, and thinking about risk and protective factors and correlation between all of the consequences that we look at when we are doing our prevention planning and our needs assessment and all of those things. So I'm going to briefly go through each dimension right now, and then we're going to dig a little bit deeper in a few minutes after we do an activity to think about how this applies for ourselves. I definitely want to encourage you. They give a couple of, I feel like some of the definitions they give in here are fairly basic. So I would love it if people would be involved as we're going through, and you want to share in the chat other ideas that you have for things that would fit with each dimension, or maybe something particular that you have done that you've incorporated. So the first one, for example, here is the physical dimension. So recognizing the need for physical activity, diet, sleep, and nutrition. And so they give a few examples: staying active, taking the stairs, making healthy food choices, getting enough sleep, seeing your doctor regularly. What other things in the chat have you found have helped you to do something in this area as far as adding in a little more physical activity, or a trick that you found that helps you get a little bit more sleep, helps you manage your diet? I would love if as we go through each of these, if people want to just go ahead while I'm talking for each one, feel free to just keep popping in the chat. Someone says drinking water. That I feel like that is one for me that makes a huge difference, that I tried to create a healthy habit for myself of just drinking a giant glass of water when I wake up every morning, because I realize I get busy and don't drink enough during the day. So we've got lots of different ideas that people are sharing: meal planning, getting a pandemic puppy and now having to go on daily walks. Great. So keep those coming through the chat throughout. Don't feel like you have to wait for a prompt as we go through each of the dimensions. Would love to have everybody chiming in the conversation. So the next one is the emotional dimension. So coping effectively with life and creating satisfying relationships. And so what are the things that all of you do or would love to do thinking about the emotional dimension? They give examples about being aware of and expressing your feelings, seeking support with upsetting emotions, learning your strengths and things that you want to do to improve. Again, I find it so interesting here how woven throughout so much of these is this idea of support and social connection and creating a sense of community. So other things that you have found that fit into this dimension: reading a book that helps me be more active in my thoughts and what I'm feeling. Yeah. Helping during services, helping people get up and be active. So for the physical one, we've found that a lot. And it's interesting because I think in the work that I do in my other work, our folks do home visiting, which has been really difficult during the pandemic, but they've found that there's actually been a lot of unexpected benefit to now doing some outdoor visits and walking visits with folks connected to that. I know for myself, for this emotional one, I have found that podcasts are great, especially when I'm in my car. I've got a few that I really love. And also, if people want to share in the chat, if there's like a book or a resource or something you love, I'm super into right now. Glennon Doyle, who wrote Untamed, and she wrote another book too. And she has a podcast called We Can Do Hard Things. And it's all about feeling your feelings and talking about hard things. And there's a lot in there about relationships and all those things. That's currently one of my favorites, my personal favorites, not giving a DPH endorsement of anything particular. So the social dimension, developing a sense of connection, belonging, and a well-developed support system. And so thinking about, who are really those people that are supportive of me? How can I build more connections into my day by calling someone or emailing? I think this one, again, in the current times that we're in, where we're maybe going out less, or things in person are still not happening as much as they were. We might not be in our offices as much as we were. What are those ways of making social connections that maybe we have to be more purposeful now about than we were previously? Joining a club or a group or a volunteer group, or thinking about joining a support group around something specific that would be really meaningful for you. Occupational dimension is about getting personal satisfaction and enrichment from your work or your hobbies. And so they really are clear in a lot of the resources they provide that this one isn't just about your work that you do for pay, that this is also about if you do something as a volunteer, it's about really about your purpose and doing something that you get personal satisfaction and feel enrichment and purpose from. The intellectual dimension is about recognizing creative abilities and finding ways to expand knowledge and skills. And so, things at the library or a new book series that interests you. I just joined a book club. I haven't done one in a long time, but I find I love to read, and I definitely enjoy choosing books and reading them. But I find for myself that when I join a book club, I end up reading books that are not the same kind of genre that I tend to usually pick, or the same couple of authors that I really like, that I read, find an author I love and read all of their books. And so for me, joining a book club is a nice way to get exposed to some new ideas and some new styles of writing. And sometimes that means I find something I love, and sometimes not so much. But for me, it's always still great to get together with a group of people and talk about books and drink coffee. So I'm happy either way. Cabriz talks about doing a book club at work. And Carrie shared that podcasts are good for this too. I like to do that sometimes too, just sort of like click around and or on Netflix, I might choose. I watched a documentary the other day on tree logging, which isn't, I'm not necessarily saying if I'm like for it or against it or, whatever, but just, I thought, it is something that I don't know anything about, and that looked really interesting. And so, podcasts or new shows about something that are different, that just feels stimulating. And Devin says she agrees with Carrie that she's tried listening to more financial podcasts, and that is a perfect segue into the next dimension, which is the financial dimension, finding satisfaction with current and future financial situations. And so thinking about budgeting, spending, meeting with someone who can help with finances, and exploring ways to save for the future. And so if others have thoughts about something that they have found a helpful resource for this dimension, or something they love to do in this dimension. And like I said, we're going to go through these briefly, and then we're going to kind of unpack them a little bit more in a few minutes. Environmental, achieving good health by occupying pleasant, stimulating environments that support well-being. I thought it was so interesting that when I was first looking at this a while back, thinking about like the environmental dimension made me think of more about the outside environment. And I hadn't thought about this connection as far as like, how does my inside environment feel? In fact, this morning, as I was getting ready to do this webinar today, I realized that, I wanted to have my setup with like my notes and my video and my phone where I could see the time, but not be distracted. And that my desk was a mess, like Post-its everywhere, seltzer cans from the last couple of days, tons of papers from things I had been reviewing and was done with and didn't need to be taking up space on my desk. And I took 10 minutes to clean everything off my desk. And it was like, oh, my brain just felt freer, that I felt like I could sit down and focus on what was right in front of me instead of being distracted by like the million, things that are always competing for attention at my desk. And I hadn't really thought so much about this idea of the environment being not just the environment outside, but like my literal physical environment about where I sit and where I work and where I eat and where I do all of those things every day. The spiritual dimension, which someone I saw mentioned in the chat already as well, expanding your sense of purpose and meaning in life. And this doesn't have to be necessarily connected to a particular practice, but for you to just make time for practices that enhance your own sense of self and connection, that support your values and principles and beliefs, and to really find a community whose spiritual outlook that you share. Looking at the previous ones, Cabri shared in the chat, the state of your bed is the state of your head. That's so interesting. This idea of like literally being able to look at your external physical environment and how that's a reflection on where things are with you internally. That's such a great saying to bear in mind, Cabri. Thank you. And then again, I think it's interesting, this idea how, we talk about the 8 dimensions and as if they might be separate things, but that really they're all interconnected. And so they give a couple of examples here. For example, the financial dimension might affect how people feel they can succeed socially, or the occupational dimension might suffer if you're not feeling stimulated intellectually, or maybe again, something going on with work that means you're having less social connections might have an impact on that. Anybody like to share in the chat one way that you have seen these connections, or feel free to unmute. How have you seen these dimensions to be interconnected, where maybe something challenging happening in one dimension has an impact on another, or on the flip side, that maybe making a change in one dimension has also had a ripple effect to make a change and improvement in another? Is there anybody that wants to unmute and share something, or share in the chat?
Yeah, this is Kenan. How you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
I was thinking about that before you asked the question. I was just thinking with the spiritual dimension. I'm going to replace that word with foundation.
Mm-hmm.
That the stronger I am in faith and how I practice impacts all those dimensions, whether it's occupational, whether it's having somebody to turn something over to, whatever the case may be, So I think that one in particular for me impacts the rest of them. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to share something they've noticed about how the dimensions are interconnected? So we've got, hey, Mickey.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I would say the occupational, since how I have moved up to the supervisor position, that has kind of moved everything in the circle. So I'm trying to find the balance now to make it so that I can fulfill my work stuff as well as, me and my family and all of that.
It's so interesting. We're going to do an activity in a minute where we're going to look at where we are sort of in the different dimensions and make like a circle and think about kind of like where it's a little flat and where it's not. And I think that's such an interesting point that that this is at any moment in time. And when one of those dimensions has a big shift, or maybe even a small shift, you have to go back and sort of recalibrate everything sometimes. Absolutely. Let's see what other folks have shared. And that emotional well-being can really affect us physically. Having a client that's under extreme duress, sometimes there's more physical symptoms and ailments. One thing from one category can affect all the others. Emotionally, something happens and affects the rest. Physically, something happens and that always flips the rest. You might not try to, but it just happens. Somebody says Angela shares, I remind that for me, my physical health affects my mental health and vice versa, and have to maintain a balance in both. Devin shares, when I'm in an emotional distress, I don't usually go to church, read my self-help book, or physically want to get up and work out. But when I start doing those things, I'm happier and want to keep doing them, and they keep me grounded. Yeah. I haven't necessarily, when we talk about going through sort of each of them for ourselves, it's interesting, like what Mickey shared about realizing that this new role has made a shift in lots of other areas. And now that all needs to be kind of realigned. It makes me wonder, and thank you for sharing that, Devin. It makes me wonder, what's the thing sometimes that's the catalyst for that? What's the thing that makes you realize that, like, ooh, I need to do some reshifting here, because I'm seeing how what's going on in this one area is now not only not feeling great in that area, but has connections to these couple other areas. I will totally say I had a moment a couple weeks ago as I was working on this, that I was up really late at night working on a few of the slides for this and eating junk food and thinking like, oh gosh, this is a little bit self-incriminating that here I am working late into the evening when I probably should be sleeping and not eating very healthy food. And it was such a moment for me of thinking how all these things are sort of connected, that I had a lot going on at work in that particular week. And so was trying to just make everything fit into my day. And because of that, had given up on some sleep. And because of giving up on some sleep, ended up being really hungry and not making the best choices about what I was eating. And it was such an interesting moment of reflection for myself of how these things are connected. I'm curious if anybody has a thought about, is there something particular that you do in your own like practice? Is there something that you kind of do regularly for yourself to check in and say like, oh, where am I at? Or is it that something happens and it makes you kind of stop and realize? Or I think, Devin's example about realizing that when I am in a moment where I'm not going to church and I'm not getting up and working out and I'm not feeling great, like that's a moment to stop and realize that I need to put some habits back into practice that I know will make me feel better once I start doing them. Does anybody want to share how you might know when things are getting a little out of whack for yourself? I know it's kind of a deep question for a webinar with a really lot of people on it. So maybe you could think about it internally. Trouble sleeping. Yeah, that's definitely probably one for a lot of people, I bet. Getting short with family and sleeping more. Those kind of markers that make us realize like, oh, maybe I need to take a look at a few things. Irritability, yes, to sleeping, taking things too personally, getting anxious, negative thinking, crabbiness with my family. Yep. I know for myself that when one person is making me feel really grouchy, sometimes I might be like, oh, that person made me grouchy. And then when I realize that two people are making me feel really grouchy, I sort of turn the finger back to myself and think like, maybe I'm the one that has the issue going on here and perhaps not the people around me. And I need to do a little self-reflection of what's going on under the surface here. Thanks. Lots of folks are sharing things. Patience is low, staying in bed longer in the morning, getting irritated more quickly. Gabby, thank you so much for sharing this. Gabby says an important piece is not beating herself up when she realizes that things are out of balance. Absolutely. I mean, that's really I think there's a tendency sometimes when we put a focus on self-care that it becomes should. Oh my gosh, I should be taking more time. I should be getting out and walking. I, should be meditating every day or whatever it might be. And or when things are feeling out of balance, that sometimes it's one more thing for us to then feel frustrated or overwhelmed about. And so I think being able to take the perspective of just this idea of noticing it, like I'm noticing that things are out of balance. What can I do here to kind of bring things back into alignment? Yeah, feeling like crawling under a rock or going to a deserted island to have a moment of total silence. Absolutely. Anything else about this in this kind of section right here? Because then we're going to do, I think we're going to do we're going to do an activity in just a minute. I just wanted to put this up real quick because it was connected. As I said, that first kind of bunch of slides came right from SAMHSA, and these were the references that were connected to their slides. So I just wanted to make sure that they stayed connected. So we're going to do an activity. I'm going to show you the picture of the activity, and please don't let it sort of feel overwhelming because we're going to walk through it, and we're going to take a few minutes to do this. I know that this slide looks incredibly busy, and trust me, it took me a little while to make it because it is kind of busy, but I would love for everyone, if you are able, and if not, I'm going to send these out after, if you are able to grab a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil or a marker, or if you're like me and still have a small child at home, I always have random crayons laying around under my feet. Would love everyone to take a piece of paper, and I promise this is not going to be as complicated as it looks on the screen. So take your paper, and it's really hard for you to see on this video. I think I can't change it right now. Let's see. You can't really see mine on the video, but it looks like what's on the screen. I want you to take a pen or whatever you have to write with and just write each of the dimensions around the paper. And on my paper, I didn't write them all out. At the top, I wrote EM for emotional, and then I wrote SP for spiritual, but just take your paper and write. Let's see if I can get this in just the right spot here. Oh, you can sort of see it. Oh, come on. Oh, Zoom backgrounds. Okay. Oh, you can kind of see it. So take your piece of paper and just write around it, right around the outside. In a circle on the paper. So at the top, you're going to write emotional, and then you're going to write spiritual. It doesn't have to be perfect. No one else is going to see it. Intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, occupational, and social. And like I said, you don't even have to write them all out. Just write like a letter for each of them or something. So in a big circle around the edges of the paper, go ahead and write each of the dimensions. And maybe if a few people want to just give me like a K in the text when you got that step done. Great. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, great. So now what I want you to do, I found it easiest because they're all going to kind of radiate from the middle, is to put a number 1 smack in the middle. And then you're going to number it 2, 3, 4, 5 from the middle up to each dimension. So you're going to do 2, 3, 4, 5 up to each dimension all the way around the circle, just like it is on the screen. So I found it easiest to put a 1 in the middle and then just put the rest of the numbers kind of spoking out to each. So if you want to do that, and then let me know when you've got that step done. I know it's going to take a minute. Take your time. Great. Okay. And if you haven't finished it yet, carry on. So I'm going to annotate on the screen, but not anybody else. So just, I'll show mine on this screen, for example, and then I want you to write yours on your paper. And what I'd like you to do, and we're going to give everybody a few minutes because I really want you to be able to take some time to think about it. Think about, for each of these dimensions, where do you feel like you are right now? So if 5 is like, great, I am rocking this one. I feel so good about my physical wellness. I'm, getting out for a walk every day, and I'm doing some short yoga in the evening before I go to bed, I feel like I'm spot on. This one's a 5. The 5 is the most and 1 is the least. And so for me, physical right now, be like, yeah, I know I should do that, but I'm not really doing it. I'm not feeling great about it. So for me, maybe for physical, I'm going to circle a 2. And so I'm going to show you, mine on here, but I want you to do yours on your own paper. So you're going to go through each one and think about what your number is for each one. So for emotional, maybe right now I feel like a 4. And for spiritual, I have gotten super involved at my church and I'm volunteering and on a committee. So I'm feeling good about that. And I'm at a 5. So take a few minutes, go through each one really thoughtfully and think about, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being least and 5 being the most, how you're feeling in each dimension. All right, so I'll give folks another minute just to finish. But if you want to let me know, no pressure if you're not, but if you want to let me know in the chat if you're done, I'll just get a good sense of where everybody's at. All right, so we've got kind of a handful of people. Give it maybe one more minute. All right, so now I'm going to try to do this on Annotate. You will all do it much better on your papers, I'm sure. What I want you to do is connect the dots and see what that looks like. Because ideally, if you had all 5s, it would be one really big circle. So you're going to go through and connect all of your dots. And you can also, if you want, what I'm going to do with mine, I'm going to change the color so I can see it. I'm going to actually do both on mine. I connected my dots, and then I'm also going to go through and try with my annotation here, if I can do it with a steady hand, to actually show if everything was a 5, kind of where the circle would be. So if you want to connect all of your dots and then connect a big circle from all the 5s. I like this activity because it gives you a really visual way to see where the circle might be a little flat. And so I can look at this and say, I can kind of see that I'm kind of 4s and 5s in this area up at the top here with these few dimensions. But then I definitely can see, sorry, I'm going to change this color so I can highlight it here. But I for sure can see for myself, let's see, I can for sure see for myself that there is a big dip right here in physical, and also in this like environmental one, that my circle has this like little bit of a collapse here at the moment. And so when I'm thinking about the fact that these are all interconnected, and which ones I might really want to focus on, not only because I want to, for myself, focus on thinking about my physical wellness and also thinking about my environment. I also know that maybe some of this is also having an impact on some of these other ones that are at a 4 right now, or maybe not quite where I want them to be. Does anybody feel comfortable? Would anyone like to share what you found, anything, share what you thought of this activity, and or what you, if you want to share a reflection about looking at your own circle? Would anybody like to share? And like, feel free to unmute or to share in the chat. Not a circle, more like a C. Made me a lot more aware. For me too, doing this for real for myself, I was like, oh, this is sort of interesting where this little dip is. Thanks, Anne. Anne says she liked this activity. And you'll all get a copy of the slides, so you can use this without having to draw it or recreate it. Or if you want to do it with a group, you could use this as like a handout. Being aware of parts that might need a little more TLC. Anyone else? Mine looked like a sweet potato. But yeah, oh, it's so interesting too, Julie, talking about easier to see where there's been some improvements. I think it would be really interesting to do this at different points in time and kind of see how the circle might fluctuate. As I think, again, as Gabby said, sort of being gentle on ourselves, that sometimes things do kind of get out of sync, and we just need to think about how we're going to address it. And that certainly, I'm sure there are times that one area feels a lot better than another area. Feeling aware of these things, but the visual makes it more real. Yeah, I know I'm definitely a visual person that, I mean, even for myself and looking, I know that I have let the physical piece slide lately. I moved into a new house a couple months ago and set up my treadmill in the basement, and I've literally been on it twice since August. And while I've known that that's in the back of my mind, actually seeing this for myself on paper and seeing, like, if I'm being honest, that physical's at like a 2, it definitely made me feel more committed to making a plan to make a change in that area. And thanks, Deb shared that she also needs to work on physical as an area. And that it's, Devin, thanks for asking. Is it easy or realistic to get back to being well-rounded in all of these areas? Devin, what do you think about that?
I'll unmute myself for this because I feel like it would be easier to kind of talk about it. I mean, I think it's realistic. I think it is going to take a lot of work. And so, no, it probably won't be as easy as, getting back to a good foundation with all of it. But I think that we at least know kind of where our basis is at. So, I mean, like, if, let's say, occupational is at a 5, yet your emotional is at a 3, are you taking on a lot of other stress that maybe you can kind of wean off of to make yourself more balanced? So it's kind of just finding those places where you think that you can kind of begin to set yourself up for more success.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. I think this is such an interesting question. Because it makes me wonder, I think literally your idea of, is it realistic to think that we're going to be at a place in our lives where everything is a 5? Maybe not. Maybe, I mean, I think this activity is really more about being aware of where things don't feel so great, and that it isn't necessarily the ideal that everything will always be a 5. But I think maybe even just for myself, heard in what you said, this idea of also being able to look at it that, if right now I have a 5 in occupational because I feel like I'm rocking it at work and all these great things are happening, can I also look at my wheel and see, like, oh, I said this was a 5 in occupational because this feels like it's in a great place. But what I'm realizing is my social relationships are now a 2 and my physical is now a 2, and is something else in this sort of bringing this out of balance that I might need to think about, how to align that, and where might it feel good to me to have each of these be that feels more in balance, which kind of goes back to what Mickey shared a little while ago as well. That's such a great point, Devin. Thank you. Do you want to say anything else about that, or does anyone else? So I wanted to share, to dig a little bit deeper into some of the dimensions, and then we're going to kind of widen the lens a little bit after this. This guide, if you haven't seen it yet, is available from SAMHSA in their store. You can download it really easily. And this one is really, they have all different guides related to this, which I love. And I think it's so great for all of us because, you know, for me, it's like, ooh, this one is so great because I can use it in my, like, personally. And then there's also one that's about taking action in your community. And there's also one that's specific to healthcare providers. And there's one about celebrating National Wellness Week. But this one in particular, this step-by-step guide to wellness, I wanted to take a few minutes just to walk folks through each of the dimensions in it. And I didn't make a whole bunch of slides for each one. I'm just going to kind of flip through the guide. And I want folks to feel free to share in the chat or to jump in as we go through it. But what I like about the guide is that there's, you know, some introductory stuff, but then they share, there's a page for each dimension. And so it talks about, you know, here's the page about improving physical wellness. It says, a healthy body, good physical health habits, nutrition, exercise, appropriate healthcare. All of those make up the physical dimension of wellness. And a few ways that we could get there might be by choosing things that make our body feel good and trimming back on things that don't. We can also create a routine that balances activity. So it's got a little description of each dimension at the top, and then it has a table that, so for this one, it talks about nutrition and physical activity and sleep. And it gives you something to think about for each of those. And then it gives you a list of resources that you might look to. And so the one that kind of jumped out to me in looking at the one around physical wellness were there questions around nutrition. And they asked, you know, kind of typical ones about, do you have access to healthy, fresh food? The one I thought that was really interesting said, are you in a position to eat at home so that you can better track what you're eating and putting into your body? And I thought, to me, that was such an interesting question because I think given spending a lot more time at home, and for me, working from home during the pandemic, sometimes being home and eating at home has not been so great for my healthy choices, because instead of being really motivated in the morning to pack myself a healthy lunch and take that to work, and then I have to eat what there is to eat, instead I find myself like grazing throughout the day or choosing something not so healthy. But it gives, is anyone else, I see a little bit of nodding, anyone else like feeling me on that maybe? Yeah, thank you. So it's got some things to think about. It's got some resources for each one. And then the following page for each one is like a little chart or checklist for yourself that says, what are the things that I could do and what will I need to do it? And so my example for myself is I'm going to organize. I don't think I'm going to invest time into entirely packing my lunch when I'm working from home, but I'm going to take some time in the morning when I have my most motivation to kind of set aside and organize a few things that, like, I'm going to put a yogurt and some cheese like right up in the front of the refrigerator where they're the first things I see and I can grab them. And maybe, you know, move the cake left over from the night before to the back, so it's at least not the first thing I see. And people can feel free to, if you have other thoughts, to share in the chat. The next one is thinking about intellectual wellness, which again, thinking about things that keep our brains active, our intellect expanding. And I think this one is interesting because it really talks about the idea of looking at things from different perspectives. And one of the areas that they highlight in here is conversation. And it's, you know, the question that they ask people to think about is, do you enjoy taking part in discussions, conversations, debates, and other ways of gaining enhanced understanding? And I was curious for folks on this one. I feel like there's a lot of fatigue sometimes around political conversations, whether it's about actually about politics or about things around the virus or people's opinions about different things that people are often having in social media. And I have noticed for myself that when I remove myself from that and have tried more often to have thoughtful conversations with smaller groups of friends in person, that has been definitely helpful for me in thinking about not only my emotional wellness, but also my social connections. I'm curious if anyone else has, again, something that they've done that they've noticed around intellectual wellness. Oh, thanks, Cabri. Cabri's sharing from the one before. She loves to keep healthy snacks in her desk drawer, and that sometimes she just has to avoid the kitchen at work because everyone in the office loves to bring treats. I know. I feel like that's such a blessing and a curse to be back in an office, and sometimes it's great when you're hungry and there's treats in the kitchen, and sometimes not so much. Cassidy, do you want to share something? Yeah. Oh, Cassidy, did you want to share something? Okay, maybe not. Anybody want to share something? So then there's tips like for lots of different areas. So thinking about financial wellness, they talk about looking for financial advisor, thinking of, is it helpful to think about your debt? I know that I found out recently that my car insurance company actually has free financial advice and an advisor that I can meet with, which is great. Again, thinking about environmental wellness, they have a whole section on here that isn't just about, they have a section on green living and recycling and all of that, which is great, but also thinking about your home environment and your work environment. There's a worksheet to go with each of these. So I'm not going to go back through all of them really specifically, but if you're interested and if it's something, especially from doing that, even just that brief activity, that might be something that you want to give some thought to, this is a great place to start that has some prompting questions and some templates that you can fill out. Colleen shared intellectual wellness after a longer day, lots of information overload, making sure to do something mindless. So like baking or a funny movie. So we're going to transition now into talking about how to sort of widen this out from thinking of the lens through how this impacts us, which is of course hugely important because we know to be able to even bring our best selves to work and to the work that we do in our communities, we need to make sure that we're taking good care of ourselves and that we have a focus on our own balance and our own wellness. And I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about what this looks like and how we might integrate it into our workplace and into the communities. But before we do that, does anybody want to share anything else as far as just thinking about the dimensions overall or thinking about what the impact may be for us personally? Okay. So this next section comes from SAMHSA'S, mostly comes from SAMHSA'S resource on promoting wellness in the community. And when you get the materials, you'll be able to have the link right there. I did adapt some of them a little bit, but three of the main things that they talk about in that resource is really thinking about this year round. They're big on promoting National Wellness Week. I know a lot of times in prevention, we might have, last September was Recovery Month. When people really might have a focus on one particular issue. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but really thinking about how you can do this year round. I find especially when it comes to conversations about wellness or conversations about self-care that we tend to sort of have them kind of bubble up periodically. And that this is about really thinking about a thoughtful plan. So when you're doing planning with your group, when you're doing assessment, when you're doing strategic planning, maybe every time you get together with your coalition, it's a standing item during your meeting. How do you really think about integrating this into everything that you're doing year round? And then we're going to also talk about messages to share and partnering for wellness. So I kind of started speaking to this piece already as far as integrating wellness year round. So how can you incorporate, knowing that simply promoting information, information dissemination, sharing information around this can have an impact on the things that we are trying to influence in our communities around substance use, around behavioral health, around the impact of that on our communities, knowing that helping at the same time to bolster these protective factors and to promote wellness can have a really positive impact on the things that we're trying to influence. What are the kinds of things that you could do to be integrating this into your work? And so thinking about the communities that you're already a part of, how could you introduce this into the conversation? Or how could you create a community that might be focused on this? One of the things that we started doing at my other work early on in the pandemic, and it's continued, was to offer Motivation Mondays. We really found that people were wanting more opportunity both to connect socially, but to also have some real practical ways to integrate wellness, both for themselves personally and for the families that they were working with. And so every Monday, it's just a half an hour. We often show some like a YouTube clip that's about gratitude practices, or about incorporating a brief meditation, or something that might relieve stress, or whatever it might be. And we just bring a group of folks together. It's really relaxed and flexible. We share something with them. And then, people have 20 minutes to share their responses and share some thoughts with each other, or even just to kind of check in if they've got a lot going on, and a chance to feel connected and supported by the rest of the team that's doing this like similar work across a really large geographic area. And we found that by creating that space and that community, people reflected back to us that it really made a difference for them in how they jumped into their week and their own feeling of fatigue, or being able to start the week feeling more energized and motivated and ready to approach their work. And so thinking about, ways to kind of expand something that already exists by adding some of this information or adding some practices in, or maybe in creating that if it's not something that exists already. And then sharing materials. These SAMHSA materials are all really easy, and they're nice. They're very concise. Like the one for healthcare providers is 2 pages long. Even the community one is only a few pages long. And so being able to, share something on your website or attached to your coalition meeting minutes or whatever it might be, really being able to share this across multiple audiences in the work that you're doing. And in thinking about it, again, in everything I do in prevention, I don't think this is just my own bias. I always can see how it is connected back to building capacity. I think so much of what we do, that the more stakeholders and partners and champions and people that are impacted by the issues that we want to address, the more that we bring those people into the conversation, and the earlier that we do it, the better our work is going to be. And so I think that is true for this, as it is for all of the other topics that we touch upon when we talk about prevention. And so, to me, in thinking about messages to share, I always think about shared outcomes. And so if I'm going to connect with someone that works in suicide prevention, how can I help them to really concretely see how the work I'm doing in prevention, how my thinking about wellness and SAMHSA'S 8 dimensions has a really direct correlation to the work that they're doing, and where we may have an outcome in common here, that we could do some shared media, we could do some shared messaging, we could approach shared partners together. I'm going to the school district because I really am hoping that they'll include this information in next month's newsletter, or I really would like to think about a policy around this. And I understand that you're going to them because you want them to consider a policy around something else. let's sit down together and look at where those might overlap and where we might have some shared outcomes, and think about how we could approach that person together, or think about how I maybe, if I'm going to make an ask about something, could actually take your information with me and make that part of what I'm going and presenting about, and leverage my time and the resources that I'm already putting the work into to benefit your outcome, because your outcome also benefits my work. And so really thinking about where you can connect to those shared outcomes, and very, very clear connections around other, as wellness relates to other behavioral health conditions, severe mental illness, substance use disorder, maintaining recovery. I think there's some things that you can really lift up from the information that we've shared today, as well as the additional information that SAMHSA has shared and from other places. And again, I think to promote this idea of interconnectedness, that while I understand as a partner, or I understand in your work that you might be doing, that you're really focused on this one thing, but what we know is there's so much interconnectedness between them that having an impact on what I'm working on over here absolutely will have an influence and impact on what I know you are very passionate about working on over here. And then that leads right into this idea of partnering for wellness. So thinking about who you could engage in doing this, and making sure that those folks reflect the culture and the makeup of your community. Again, like I feel like I bring this into a lot of the webinars. Some of you have done multiple webinars that we've done together, that I think when you're building capacity and you're looking to partner with people on folks, that doing your groundwork to really think about what is it you're asking them to do and what's in it for them. I would love for you to share this information on your website. I would love for you to come to this meeting and bring that data that I know you have. I'd love for you to bring your expertise to us on this. I'd love for you to introduce us to this partner that we really want to work with and we don't have a connection with, but I know that you do. Be really specific about what you would like someone to do. We're not ever trying to just bring more people around our table for the sake of bringing people around our table. We want to bring people around the table for the benefit of our work, and figuring out what is it that's missing. What do we need other partners to be able to do? And then to be able to say to them, and here's what's in it for you. Here's how your work might benefit from this. Here's how you might benefit from this personally. Here's where I can understand there might be a barrier. I know it's really hard to get to our coalition meetings because they're over lunchtime, but we now have an option that you can Zoom if there's one that you can't get to in person. Or I know it might be really challenging to come out on this issue around problem gambling because you live in a community that gets a lot of revenue from a casino. And so can we sit down and talk about where the benefits and barriers might be, and can I share some information with you that I think might bring you on board with what we're trying to share some information about. Always engaging partners early. The earlier in the process that you have other people on board to help shape what they know of the community, what they know is already happening, what resources might exist, thinking about the cultural ramifications of reaching a certain population. The earlier that you can have that information and influence, the better and more solid the foundation for your work is going to be as you then move forward into later steps. And then, again, thinking about how you can leverage media with your partners. How can you share media? How can you do joint media? How can you take advantage of that together? So we're going to take, what time is it? Oh, we're doing pretty good. I want to take just a few minutes, and you can do this. I know this was a lot of information. I mean, we're talking about 8 different dimensions and them all separately and how they're connected, all in the last, 75 minutes so far here. But I'd love to just take a minute and give you a chance to think about or to share some ideas on how you might use this information. And so we're going to do this in 3 sections. What you might do with what your next step might be personally, if there's something that you want to start doing, stop doing, something you want to know more about, something you're going to think about after this, we're going to do a personal one, an at my workplace one, and a work in the community one. So you are welcome to do this however feels more comfortable. I'm going to turn on the annotate so that if people want to annotate, you are welcome to share your next steps right on the screen. You're welcome to share it in the chat, or if you'd rather just write yourself a little Post-it note because you want to think about something that you want to do on your own, then you can do that as well. So next steps that you, and one next step for you personally related to anything that we talked about today, or that anything it made you think about. And I think I can see a couple folks maybe writing something. As I said, feel free to write it for yourself. You can annotate and write it right on the screen, or you can share in the chat.
Claire, this is Nora.
Hi, Nora, or unmute, even better. Thanks, Nora. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I actually find all the information that you're sharing super helpful, and I kind of have a few ideas, but being in the world of prevention for a while, I think that when we use the word prevention a lot, it kind of scares people off. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I feel that the title, even educator, kind of scares people off. Mm-hmm. And I'm not just talking about the regular community. And I may be the only one that has experienced this. Maybe others have. But whenever I talk about, the work we do, alcohol, problem gambling, it kind of turns people off. So sometimes I wonder if it would be beneficial for us to kind of create a new title for us that actually surrounds the word wellness, like mm-hmm. wellness educators instead mm-hmm. of prevention, because I feel that may be more welcome, that people will be more open mm-hmm. to talk about wellness than they are about prevention with alcohol and other drugs. So maybe that just has been my experience. So even if I plan to incorporate that word, mm-hmm. but at the rate that I am working with communities, mm-hmm. they already know me as the no tobacco, no alcohol, no problem gambling lady. Mm-hmm. So maybe that just has been my experience.
Thank you for sharing that, Nora. Yeah, I find like often over the years, like when you're trying to write like your, elevator speech for prevention, it's really hard to like explain what we even do sometimes in a short amount. And I think you're making a great point that and also kind of connected with what I was just talking about. I think this idea of helping people to see where it connects to the things that they care about. And so you're absolutely right. Like if we go into communities and we're coming at it from no, you shouldn't, whatever it might be. People don't necessarily want to hear that. And so being able to think about for each of those partners, because it's not the same message for everyone. It's different for parents than it is for high school students, than it is for older adults, to say, to relate it to wellness, or to relate it to what you want to see in the community. Wouldn't it be so great if our kids felt like the healthy choice was the easy choice, and that we really worked together to make this community feel like being involved in activities that didn't involve drinking or using tobacco was what everybody did. And then being able to say, how could we get there? Let's work together on this. I think being able to think about exactly what you said, like what is that language that resonates for people? So whether it's wellness, whether it's healthy communities, whether it's safe and happy kids, whatever that might be, to look at where that language meets what's in it for somebody else. What are the things that I care about? I care about my kids. I care about them, driving safe and having friends that make good choices, and whatever it might be. That language, I think, often is the door to get in. And then once we get in, that's often then where, in our coalition meetings or in the other things that we're doing, we say, hey, so let me tell you a little bit about the strategic prevention framework. That is like how we sort of think about what we do, because we know if we start by really looking at what's going on in our community and we write a really good plan together, then we know the things that we do are more likely to have an impact. Or, hey, let me tell you what I know about SAMHSA'S dimensions of wellness. It's so interesting to me that, you're really interested as the gym teacher in, kids' physical wellness. And I know that the social dimension is really connected. So maybe we can think about how we could address these two things together, because also as a prevention specialist, I know that kids that have healthy activities and peers that don't use substances and all of these things, that's good prevention. And so I think being able to frame it in those words for folks is, I 100% agree, much more approachable than the jargon we often tend to use, or kind of jumping right in with, here's the thing that I want to fix. So sorry that I feel like I got on my soapbox a little bit there. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this one. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to clear this one because I just want to be mindful of time for folks. But that is, Nora, I love that you brought that up, because that is like speaking to my experience very much. And also I think to a lot in the work that I've done in prevention for a long time, training both regionally and nationally, that is so common to hear around how do I go into a community and talk about prevention. And so I'm really thankful that you shared that. I don't know why my computer seems to be frozen. If this is creeping me out, hold on a second. I hope you guys can still hear me. Can everybody still hear me? Let's see.
Yes, I can still hear you.
Okay, thanks, Jody. I don't know why my computer seems to be, oh, you know why? Because I'm still on annotate. That's why. Phew. Okay. Great. So I want to leave a couple minutes for some things at the end. So thanks, everybody. So briefly, a next step that you might take at your place of work, which I wanted to differentiate from work that you do with your community partners. So this is like literally at your workplace or with your coworkers, whether that's in Zoom or physically or whatever it might be. So a next step that you might take at your workplace. And thanks, Jody, for the reminder in the chat for folks when we're finished to fill out the evaluation. That would be very much appreciated. So anybody want to share a next step that you want to take at your workplace? I know it takes a minute to type in the annotation or in the chat. Being aware everyone's at different places with wellness. Yep, absolutely. Accountability partners. Thanks, Jody. That's work is a great place for that. Communicating effectively so everyone has a good understanding. All right, do we have one more? All right. And then, this one's at the heart, right, of a lot of what we do. A couple of folks that want to share a next step in your community. Oh, thanks to someone that just popped up from the one before about being, being mindful about communication with coworkers, making more of an effort to create socially with others at work on a social level rather than just work topics to support both mine and others' wellness. Great, thank you. Also, I think those could extend to our work in the community, right? I know I feel like a lot of good prevention happened in the work that I did by just meeting with folks over a cup of coffee, whether nowadays I would say was in person or was virtually. I think having, building relationships with people can really go a long way to bringing them into the work that we're doing and finding those shared outcomes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clear the annotation. Whoops. And I'll actually, let's see, I'm going to actually turn it off for now. Okay, so we've got just a couple minutes left, but I would love if folks have time to stay on at the end. I have just a nice 5-minute meditation that I thought would be a nice way to kind of end things as we step back into the rest of our day. So if you have time to stay on for that, that would be great. I do want to also leave a couple minutes for questions if there's any. So I'm just briefly going to remind you that after the presentation, you'll get a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording, and also anything else that came up, I will share out. You'll also get your CEU certificate. For those of you that joined a little bit late, I wanted to let folks know that I do now have approval from IBC for August and September's webinars. I appreciate everybody's patience that there were some issues with getting those for those couple of months had gotten backed up. And so I will get those out to folks over the next couple of weeks. I just got those approvals, so I have to create all the certificates, but I'll get those out for folks. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. And then you can't click on the link on the screen, but Jody will repost it in the chat now and then also right at the end. And I would love it if you have a minute, just as soon as you're done with the webinar, if you just want to navigate right to that and provide some feedback. I always look at these. I really appreciate the feedback, anything both that's helpful and you would love to keep happening, and also super helpful to know the things that were not helpful and you would like for me to not do, or for someone else that was a presenter maybe not to utilize or do again. I might also absolutely go to the section on suggestions for the future and suggested topics. That is actually one of the main sources of where I get future topics for these webinars. Just a reminder in that this is a prevention webinar series. We're kind of funded, and that this series came as a result of wanting to do more webinars for the prevention field, and anybody that wants to join is welcome to join, but just kind of putting that out there that's why the focus is very much kind of focused on that end of the continuum around prevention. But please, like future topics, other things, I always look to those. So I'm going to give it just a minute or two to see if anyone has any questions, and then we'll end the last 5 minutes here with just a brief meditation. So does anyone have any questions or comments that you want to share in the chat? I'm hoping that we got to do lots of connecting throughout, so it doesn't feel like we're shortchanging it at the end here. All right.